2024, and we are live on Ancient Faith Radio. Welcome to Everyday Orthodox. I'm Melissa Bielatich Davis, and we get together here every Sunday evening to meet another everyday Orthodox Christian and to build community through conversation. Here in North America, Orthodoxy can be very fragmented. We are split up into different jurisdictions, and we're worshiping maybe even in different languages on different calendars. But, I'm convinced that Orthodox unity is not really about administrative unity, right? It's really just about getting to know one another and thinking about each other as brothers and sisters in Christ. And so that's what we're doing here. So, just by showing up, you and I are building Orthodox unity. Look at us. But so very glad that you've joined us tonight. And of course, you can always call in to really join us. You can join the conversation. The phone number is 1-855-AF-RADIO. That is 1-855-237-2346. Matushka Trudy Richter is right here taking your calls. We are streaming on YouTube if you want to see our happy faces. We're on Facebook Live. We're on the AFR app. We're at ancientfaith.com/radio/live. And if you miss us live, you can always listen to us in the podcast archives on Ancient Faith's website. So, without any further ado, I got to tell you, we have a great guest tonight. And if you're listening live, you are just in time, or maybe early next week, then you're still just in time. But our guest has a film coming out on April 26th, which is this Friday night. So, when you're finished listening, I feel like what you need to do is hop online and buy some tickets and go see it because it's fantastic. But so, without any further ado, tonight we have Richard Ramsey on the show. Now, he is the co-writer and co-director of the new film Unsung Hero, which I have seen and liked very much. He has done a lot of comedic short films in collaboration with his brother John, which is really pretty neat. They've been featured in numerous film festivals, and his feature film debut, The Song, was released in 2014. So if you saw The Song, then maybe you kind of know a little bit about who Richard is. But he was for 6 years the artistic director of City on a Hill Studio. And then he moved to Nashville, and then he spent 3 years on the creative staff of Kingdom Story Company. And he's still in Nashville with his wife and his kids. And I'll let Richard tell you how he named his kids, which I found online, and I just thought it was adorable. But okay, without any further ado, Richard, welcome to the program. Oh no, Richard, we're not hearing you. You're so
Oh no.
quiet. Oh yeah, there you are. There you are.
Okay, go. Okay, sorry.
False alarm.
Scary. Can you hear me okay now?
I sure can.
Okay,
Welcome
good.
to the show.
Yes, it's an honor to be here and to be heard.
Well, it's really delightful to have you. I'm really thrilled that you're on the show. And so we always start off with, where does your story begin? Where were you born? Did you grow up in Texas? Where's your beginning?
Yeah, so I was actually born about an hour and a half north of here in a town called Bowling Green, Kentucky.
Oh,
But before I can even remember, my dad moved us to the Houston, Texas area for his job. And so, yeah, I grew up in Houston until my early 30s. And then I moved back to Louisville, Kentucky, which was a coincidence. It was for my job. I lived there for 11 years. And then I moved to the Nashville area in 2019, 7 months before the pandemic hit and everything shut down. So, yeah. And I've lived here ever since then.
Okay. Well, I'm going to have to ask you about that. I mean, that's sort of,
Yeah.
So when you've just moved to a new area right before the pandemic, is it extra isolating, or does the isolation not matter as much because you didn't know as many people?
It was weird because, well, one, we had just started attending St. Elizabeth's Orthodox Church. And it was funny. I just heard my priest's voice right before our show started. So that was good. That was a good welcoming in and comforting.
Yeah. So Father John Oliver, right? Yeah, that's cool.
And
that's
right.
really cool.
And so we had started going there about 3 months before the pandemic hit. So that helped us know some people. And then I had some, colleagues and stuff with work. But if you remember the early days of the pandemic when we didn't know what it was or how lethal it was, and we were wiping down our groceries and we had caught wind somehow that it hits men harder. I don't know if you remember anything like that.
Yeah, I remember that.
But we heard about this. Yeah, so my wife was like, you stay home, I'll go to the store. So I literally did not leave my neighborhood for 6 weeks. Looking back, it seems so silly, but at the time we didn't know, But yeah, I didn't leave my neighborhood for 6 weeks. And it was weird because just as I was getting my bearings and starting to learn where things were without Google Maps, like we shut down, and by the time I ventured back out of my neighborhood, I'd kind of forgot where things were. It was a wild time for everyone, but
It
yeah,
was. It's a weird time, and for a lot of us, it caught us at strange moments in our lives where all of a sudden you're like, "Well, this is the wrong moment to be locked down." Not that there's ever a good
yes,
time, but
right,
all right. So when you were growing up, then you grew up in Houston. Were
yes.
you were you in a big family? Were you in a small family? Like, what was your life like?
I was in a pretty big family. We had, two parents still together. And I had three younger brothers. Um, yeah, and so I grew up with them, and I had a half brother from my father's previous marriage, and so big family, all brothers. So that was,
Wow.
yeah, definitely some interesting dynamics. We it was definitely a unique experience for my mother. Um, she'd grown up with a mom and a sister, so this was a complete
Oh,
opposite
no
dynamic.
way. Oh
Yeah.
boy.
So yeah, and we all get along really well though now. So
Now.
it's kind of funny how that evens out over time. It helps too when everybody gets to be about the same size. That
Yeah,
can help mitigate some of the conflict.
I can imagine. I can absolutely imagine. Now, were you
Yeah.
always kind of interested in film, or is that something that happened later?
It happened later in any kind of practical pursuing it sense, but I was always really captivated by film and television. My parents took me on an early, when they were early in their marriage, they took me on a date, carrying me in like a little baby carrier to Star Wars. And I think every filmmaker, 7 years older than me or 7 years younger than me, it's all about Star Wars at the end of the day. And so, I mean, I grew up with that. And at the time, Marvel and DC like weren't where they were now, but back then there was still a lot of cartoons and TV shows, and Wonder Woman with Linda Carter was on, and Christopher Reeve Superman, and Adam West Batman was like in syndication. So I loved like all the superheroes, and I would pretend to be the superheroes and dress up with them or dress up as them. And in fact, the one superhero I was not allowed to be was the Hulk, because when I was 3 or 4, I hulked out and flipped the coffee table over and broke it. So I was not allowed to be the Hulk anymore.
That's awesome.
So, so I was always really captivated by just really imaginative media story, and so, and then in high school, I needed to pick a elective, and I was like, I've always been interested in acting, and maybe it's kind of a now or never situation with that. So I started doing theater in high school, and that kind of became my thing that I was really into. I had a really great theater teacher named Kathy Peldrell, who was really formative in kind of shaping my taste. And, I think even to this day, my taste is largely shaped by those formative years. Um, and then from that, I got to go to college, and I got a degree in theater. And then I kind of tell people that going from theater to film was kind of like transferring from PC to Mac. Like same general principles, just sort of slightly different execution. But the way that came about was prior to being Orthodox, I was raised sort of Protestant evangelical, specifically like in a Southern Baptist context. And I was going to a church in Houston, and I had just recently graduated with a BA in theater and had kind of sort of newly committed to my faith at that time. And the youth pastor, who I barely knew at the time, he approached me and said, "Hey, I hear you're into theater and drama and things like that. And we have a group of students here who are really into that as well. And they have a drama group, but the man who's been leading it and heading it up, he's moving to Oklahoma. And we wanted to know if you'd be interested in taking it over." And I wasn't particularly interested in taking it over. And I told him I'll think about it, and I may have told him I would pray about it, which is kind of the ultimate, you know, evangelical blowing someone off. I'll pray about it. And so, and I may have just hoped something would come along to just definitively keep me from doing it.
Right.
But long story shorter, I agreed to do it reluctantly, and my wife, who I was only dating at the time, she came along with me, and we had met each other in theater as well. And so we started writing like plays and stuff for these kids to do. And that's where I kind of discovered a passion for writing and directing. And I had aspirations to be an actor myself, but as an actor, I often felt like as an actor, you're often at the mercy of the worldview of the writer or the director, which most of the time was fine. But there were times where it was just starting, some of the content was starting to sit uneasy with my conscience again, sort of being renewed in my faith recently. And so I kind of saw the writing on the wall where that was going. And so this also just gave me I loved with writing that it was like, oh, now I'm in charge of the controlling ideas and themes of the story, and so somewhere along the lines in that process, we started making videos, like, writing scripts for videos. And that's where I learned about editing and things like that. So it was just kind of that segue. And that's kind of how I kind of began and segued into film from theater.
Well, that's kind of neat, really, though, that it was really in church that you were doing it. So
Yeah.
It's like a little youth group at the Baptist church. Is that?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And so the idea was like, the youth group would have certain events like a camp or like a weekend retreat. And our job was to come up with dramas or plays that would thematically tie in to whatever was being taught at the camp or the weekend retreat. And so, yeah, we would write these. And for the camps, we would do videos. And for the retreats, we would do plays. And that was actually kind of these baby steps into writing longer and longer things,
That's so cool.
And yeah, so it was just kind of like a interesting segue into writing and directing.
So were they kind of like, they weren't Bible stories, they were like after school specials, sort of like?
Well, that was the thing, is that we tried to avoid that specifically,
Right.
And so,
But so what would
they
they
were like,
be?
yeah. So there was one. This is going to sound crazy, but like, because my wife and I, we had a theater background. We loved, like, it's like, if we're going to do this, like, let's do it as much as we can. So one of them was set like in the Depression. One of them was set in like post-Napoleonic France. But they were like sort of
Cool.
parables. Yeah. So we were like, and then
Wow, that's a great
one video
way to break out of it, right? Because kind of the cliche is to be like, it has to be in today's language and today's clothing.
And it wasn't like issue oriented, like, it was, yeah. So we tried to avoid, teens in a peer pressure situation,
Right.
like you said, like It was nothing like that. We were like, no, let's do and so, we loved period pieces. We loved Shakespeare. We love, so we were like, no, let's like, and then one year when we made videos, we were like, well, we got this, it's like, they're going to be low budget. Like, we got like two nickels to like rub together to do these videos. And I was like, well, yeah, but like my wife and I, we loved like the Beatles and we loved a lot of classic rock. And, a lot of those groups made really low budget movies like Tommy or like,
Yes.
Help or Hard Day's Night. And so like one year we were like, what if the videos were just like these really kind of low budget, inspired by those early rock and roll movies. It was wild. But the youth pastor was like, yeah, go for it, whatever you want to do. Like, he was great at like just kind of letting us do our thing. I mean, obviously we wanted to, do what was sort of, I guess you would call, theologically correct relative to the denomination we were in. We didn't want to be like overtly offensive or have unsavory content. But as far as like creative, he didn't confine us at all. He just kind of really trusted us. And it was really kind of a low stakes environment for us to just kind of cut our teeth as, as creatives and writing and directing and stuff. So
that is really cool.
Yeah.
So where'd you meet your wife? Is there a story? What happened?
Yeah. So it's kind of funny. We went to rival high schools.
Oh.
So we had seen each other in plays. Like, she had seen me in a play and I'd seen her in a play, but didn't know each other. And then she had seen me in a production of South Pacific, the Rodgers and Hammerstein musical. And so we met in college because we both went to the University of Houston. So when I met her, I think someone may have introduced us and she said, oh, I saw you at South Pacific. And I was like, okay, cool. Yeah. Wow. And she felt like, I didn't know this at the time, but she felt like really embarrassed. And so it's kind of
Because you kind of blew her off when she said that. Like, oh, that's a
yeah,
lame thing to say. That's all your fault, 100%.
yeah. So, but yeah, we ended up, and I was dating someone else at the time. I think she had just recently broken up with someone, and then, but I eventually, and obviously broke up with whoever I was dating at the time. And then I guess like the next year we started dating, and yeah, and then I guess 2.5, 3 years later we got married. We have 5 kids now, and as you
Wow.
mentioned earlier in your intro, 4 of them are named after Beatles songs, and then the 5th one we just went for it and named after a Beatle.
After a
So
Beatle? Which
yeah,
Beatle?
yeah. So
Ringo? No.
George Harrison.
Surprising. Not
Yeah,
Ringo.
yeah, yeah.
But see, that's perfect when you're Orthodox and you're like, well, we've been doing all the Beatles, but we got to get
Right.
we got to get St.
Yeah,
George in there somewhere, right? Like,
yeah,
that's awesome. I love that. But
yeah.
so tell me then, how did you guys move from this like Baptist universe over to Orthodoxy?
Yeah, so I had a few touch points with Orthodoxy, and none of them at the time were super profound. They were not like, oh, because I've had this experience or this brush or encounter with Orthodoxy, I'm ready to start inquiring. It was just, when I taught media technology at a high school for 3 to 4 years. One of my other teachers in the department, she and her husband were Orthodox. My wife's best friend in Louisville was Orthodox, and her husband is actually now a priest at
Oh, wow.
St. Elias in Toledo.
Cool.
Yeah, and so, we would talk about our faith and stuff. And then I took a trip to Romania about 15 years ago, working on a project that never really came to fruition, but I saw a lot of Orthodox churches. And so there's just things like that. So I started becoming increasingly open or interested in it. And then when we moved to Murfreesboro, Tennessee, that area, which is just outside Nashville, there's an Orthodox church that we drive past every day, and which is St. Elizabeth's Orthodox Church, with Father John Oliver as the priest, who was again just on before this show aired. And my wife and I, we were really we found it daunting, the prospect of church shopping in Nashville. And I liken it to like when you get on Netflix at 10 at night and you're trying to decide what to watch, and the options are so overwhelming that you just turn it off and go to bed.
Yeah.
So we were like, well, I guess it's now or never. Like if there's ever a time to try it, it's right there. We drive by it every day. Let's try it. So we went in this first Sunday, and our church is not especially grand. It's not exactly the Hagia Sophia or it's not Notre Dame. It's a pretty utilitarian building as far as Orthodox churches go. And we're actually hoping to get a new one in the coming years. But even in that space, when I walked in, I immediately sensed a very palpable spirit of gentleness and meekness and humility and a kind of sweetness, while at the same time, and these weren't incongruent to me, a spirit that also seemed to say, don't mess with me. I'm not to be trifled with. And if you're here to shake things up and bring your hot takes and your new ideas, this isn't the place. And so I found that sort of substantive, like that solidity, that sturdiness, really appealing immediately. I just sensed it. And so we started going there. And the last Sunday I attended before the pandemic shut everything down was Forgiveness Sunday, which was a very profound experience for me because I did not know anyone really in this parish. But I had enough sort of Christian sense up at that point to understand that when you sin, you make life somehow worse for everybody on the planet,
Right.
So there was something that didn't seem ridiculous to me to go around from person to person and ask for their forgiveness.
Right.
And by the time it ended, I was just blubbering mess. And it was a really profound experience for me. And it was the first time, I think, where, well, I don't know if I would say the first time, but it was, I think what I can safely say is it was a very profound and memorable landmark experience of putting your body into the faith, because
Yes.
there's the prostrations, or there's at least the bowing at the very least, and the act of going person to person. The way Orthodoxy required you to get up and do something and put your body into it, I think was really unique to me. And I was, a lot of times I think, and I'm really grateful for my evangelical background, but I think something I gleaned from that, right or wrong, whether it was taught or not, was faith is always an inside out job, always. Like, you
Yep.
you have to have your heart and your mind right before you can act. And this kind of showed me it was almost like an illustration of what Paul talks about with putting on Christ. Sometimes faith can work from the outside in.
Mm-hmm.
And I think C.S. Lewis says it in the Screw Tape Letters, that what we do with our bodies affects our souls. And so that was a profound way of experiencing that. And then COVID happened. And so, we did remote church for a while, but then our parish, because it has an outdoor space, like a sheltered outdoor space,
Nice.
we were able to continue meeting pretty shortly after lockdowns, which I think was vital. And I think that another thing that was a solidified orthodoxy for me is, I think a lot of evangelicals, sort of reverted to YouTube church.
Mm-hmm.
With Orthodoxy, it's like we had to get up and go. Like, when you believe the presence of Christ is in the Eucharist, like, you got to get up and go to church. And so that was something that just kind of drew me in. And so we went from inquirers to catechumens, and then we were baptized into the church in February of 2022. So I'm still an Orthodox baby, basically, but that's our story.
Oh, that's so neat. I love that you had liturgy outside too at our, because we're in Austin, Texas, right? And it was warm enough. It was perfect. And I was begging for outdoor liturgy, and our parish council was like, absolutely not. Just like, really, really? It's so perfect. But anyway, I think that's the perfect solution. That's fantastic. Well, so, okay. So then that's very cool. All right. So there you are in Murfreesboro. Now you're Orthodox. You're what, like 2 years in or so?
Mm-hmm.
And how about the kids? How have they adjusted? How old are your kids?
So my kids are 19, 16, 13, 10, and 8. And it goes girl, boy, girl, girl, boy.
Oh, you got a nice mix there. Not like your mom.
Yeah. And so that was an interesting experience as well, because I would say that whatever this sort of non-specific nebulous age the Bible refers to when it talks to, the Bible uses phrase of, before he or she knows the right from the wrong. Like there, when I was in evangelicalism, it was sort of called the age of accountability. Like there's this age where suddenly you're responsible for, like, we definitely experienced that in our family. Everyone below that sort of mysterious line just kind of took to it like, well, I guess this is what we're doing now. And they just went to church and they just kind of embraced it and went with the flow. The older two were much more like, what is this? What are we doing? I thought we were Protestants, I thought, and so they had to process it on their own terms. And then we had to be very patient with them regarding that. And I think what was pretty integral to them, coming on board and embracing it for themselves, was the relationships they formed there. My son actually, he plays drums, and we have like a talent show every New Year's Eve. And so my son played drums at the talent show. And then a friend of ours came up and was like, hey, my sons play too. They should get together. So they started playing together. And so they formed really good friendships there. And I think that kind of helped, ease them into it. And then we all got baptized on the same day.
Wow. Oh,
which was a really remarkable experience.
Wow. That is really beautiful. And
but it was definitely two different tiers of how to process it, for sure.
Yeah, I think, for a little, 4 or 5-year-old kid, it's like, oh, okay, we go here now. This is nice. I like lighting candles, right? And it's just like, okay,
Right, right.
whatever. But yeah, for everybody else, it's a huge shift, right? And it's
Yeah,
like, oh, everything you taught me, you're undermining now. Like, I don't know,
right.
teenagers are a little skeptical already. So
Right, right.
that's a lot to
And
throw at them.
I think there's something also that's been very interesting with the smaller kids is how much they love it, given how little it programs anything specifically for them compared to our previous tradition background. Like a lot of times, evangelicalism, again, which I'm very grateful for and have a lot of fond feelings for. A lot of times, though, they'll do a lot of heavy programming for children,
Yeah.
and this is like our liturgy is our liturgy. We're not going to change it. We're not going to put puppets in the middle of it, or whatever it is. And I think they really like the reverence of it and the sort of otherworldliness of it and the candles and the incense. And then again, I think for them, another big draw is they get to play with their friends afterwards. And
That's right. I mean,
yeah,
it's a beautiful thing to have a loving Christian community, right? And kids
right.
respond to it, and as adults we do too. And so, even though we are
Yes.
like struggling through all these theological questions, that has something
Mhm.
to do with it as well. Just that feeling of oh, this must be Christian because I do feel this love here, and I know Christ gives
Right.
that love. But yeah, I just sometimes think maybe it's just that adults and kids just need the same programming, and
Right.
we're thinking too hard in the United
Right.
States, right? Like all these
Yeah.
churches thinking like, well, the kids like this, and then when they're 10, they like that. When they're 12, it's like, no, no, no. We're all
Yeah.
just bodies and souls moving through, and we gotta
Right.
just feed both of them.
Yeah. And then, they do catechesis and they'll do like events, adjacent to services. Like today they painted
Sure.
crosses they do all that stuff that they
Yeah,
love.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
just that the actual service is not programmed
Yeah.
to entertain
Yeah,
them,
exactly.
you know?
Exactly. No, well, and it's the same. Well, I'm a Sunday school director, right? So after
Right.
liturgy, we're doing all kinds of specific stuff, but there is something
Right.
just beautiful about the reverence and the candles, and the kids love
Hmm.
that too. They really do, and they love kissing icons when they're little, which is neat, I think. But
Yes.
all right, so we are going to take a very short break, and then we're going to be back with Richard Ramsey. We're going to hear about Unsung Hero. I want to know, how you came across this story, how all of this evolved, what it was like. So we will be right back. And keep in mind, you're welcome to call in 1-855-AF Radio, 1-855-237-2346. We'll be right back.
Everyday Orthodox with Elisa Bielatich Davis will be back in a moment. Give Elisa and her guest a call at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF Radio. St. Paisios said, "Every day you should try to plant in your soul something spiritual, which will eject something worldly and sinful. Replace the sinful images in your mind with holy ones." AtheniteUSA.com offers holy icons for those wishing to plant something spiritual in their souls. Immaculate 22-karat gold leaf hand-applied on solid wood. A lifelong gift for yourself and someone you care for. Use the code FAITH for free shipping. Come and see AtheniteUSA.com. We're back with Everyday Orthodox with Elisa Bielatich Davis. Do you have a question for Elisa and today's guest? Call in now at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF Radio. Here again is Elisa.
And welcome back to Everyday Orthodox. We're here tonight with Richard Ramsey. He's the co-writer and co-director of the new film Unsung Hero. And so Richard is sort of recently Orthodox, a couple of years now, with his wife and his 5 kids. And but so Unsung Hero, though, like this is a really neat film. This is, it's a Christian film. Tell me, Richard, like how did you come across this? And tell me a little bit about what it is.
Yeah, so the story is I don't know how many of your listeners will know of Rebecca St. James, who was a contemporary Christian singer in the 90s and 2000s. She retired for a few years and is back touring and recording. And then she has two younger brothers that are the duo that forms the spine or basis of the band for King and Country. And so when they were kids back in the early 90s, their father was a concert promoter in Australia and was very successful at that. And until he lost everything on a deal that went south and the economy tanked in Australia. And so in trying to stay in the music industry, he got a job offer in Nashville. So he moved his wife and 6 kids with one on the way to Nashville. And then shortly after arriving, found out he no longer had that job. And so the family was basically having to live hand to mouth and by miracles until Rebecca St. James became Rebecca St. James. So that's basically the story of the film. And the way I got involved was I had written a script for the first episode of what I had hoped would be a mini series. And the Irwin brothers, who did the film I Can Only Imagine, they had just started Kingdom Story Company, and they liked that script and said, "Hey, you have a talent for period pieces. The Smallbone brothers are wanting to make this movie set during the Civil War," and so they partnered me with them, and we worked on that until COVID happened, and then between COVID and just various events at the time, it was shelved, and so they decided they needed to pivot, and so Luke, one of the brothers in For King and Country, he had come up with the idea of telling their family story, their immigration story from Australia to America, in a way that kind of honored their parents and kind of put their parents as the focus, not themselves, and to some extent their older sister. And so, because our previous collaboration had gone really well, they approached me about writing it, and so I worked on the script off and on for close to 2 years. And then as we were kind of doing as Joel and I were doing kind of a final push and punch on the script, Joel asked me to co-direct it with him. So that's how, and Joel is one of the brothers in For King and Country. And so that's how I got involved in the project, is it actually started out on another project and then pivoted to this.
Okay. That's pretty cool. It's a neat story, right? Like, when they started telling it to you, did they tell it to you kind of in the way that it is told in the film, or did all of you have to kind of massage it and figure out how to, because, structuring a film is different from living your daily life.
Yeah. So I'd heard some of their story before because Luke, who's there's 2 brothers, Joel and Luke. Luke he pretty much always tells the story from the stage as part of their partnership with Compassion International. And so, so I'd heard some of it before, but never in the context of thinking of it as a movie. But then when they were sharing me more details about it, I was initially wary, because when people come to you and say, "Hey, I think my story or my family story would make a great movie," the first thought that often comes to your mind is, "Well, of course you think that." Everybody thinks that. But as they were telling me more and more about their story, I did find that not only was it a very compelling story and very inspiring, it actually did have what we call movie beats. Movies generally, no matter what the story, if they're made for the mass market, they generally follow an arc and a certain outline and certain beats. And so I realized, this does have some really great set pieces and really great movie moments. And so, so I was in, and then once I was in, I was just kind of, I was in heart and soul. But yeah, it was basically a matter of, it was complicated, but the first phase in doing the research and interviewing all the family members was seeing like what moments from their story match certain beats of a movie. Yeah. And then from there it's like building a house. You get the frame, and the joists and the studs in, and then you just start adding layer after layer after layer in detail as you go.
That's neat.
But that was kind of the start of it.
That's very cool. So when you were writing it, you're kind of picturing how it's going to be, right? Like, because it's cinematic, so you got to be picturing
Right.
it. It's visual. And then, but you didn't know you were going to be directing it. Did you think just Joel was going to direct it, or what was you
So
guys
when
were
it
going to find
started out, Joel has there's 7 Smallbone siblings, and one of them is named Ben, and he's a really good filmmaker in his own right. So it was actually originally going to be Ben and Joel that directed it,
Okay.
but Ben had recently come off a documentary about For King and Country that kind of gets into their story as well. It's a really good documentary yet to release. It should release, here in the next couple of years. And he was like, okay, I've told this story,
Right.
and then he also, from what I understand, was like, okay, produced by Smallbones, starring, because Joel plays his own dad.
Yeah.
It's like starring a Smallbone, Smallbone, co-writing
Yeah.
on the script. Is like, I'm just gonna step out. I think it needs another voice. And so when Ben stepped back, Joel asked me to step in.
That's cool. That's very, so
Yeah.
I mean, I really enjoyed it. And I
Well,
love,
thank you.
especially I love at the beginning how you're kind of cutting back and forth between there are scenes, of course, of them coming to the United States on the airplane or in the US,
Right.
and then cutting back to also the Australia scenes. And I just thought it was so cool. And I'll tell you what, my favorite moment, which is ridiculous, but I was so fired up about this. There's a moment where mom is going to be sick and she runs to the bathroom, but it's the airplane bathroom. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh, yes.
That was brilliant. That was so cool. I literally called out. I was like, wow, good one.
Yeah, we actually kind of figured that on the fly in shooting. There was actually, the way we wrote it in the script, she dashes into her bathroom at the house, and then David comes in and assures her it's going to be fine and he'll sort it out. But we were actually running out of time on that shooting day. And so I was like, wait. No. We don't need to shoot this next scene. We could just cut to the airplane bathroom. Like she'll dash out of her bedroom like she's dashing to her bathroom, and then just cut to the airplane bathroom. And that way we avoid the double beat and we save ourselves some time today. And so, yeah, we were forced into that choice by running out of time on the shooting day.
Well,
So,
it worked out beautifully. Like, it was just really
thank
neat.
you.
Like, as a viewer, you're watching it and you're like, wait, the airplane. Oh, okay. It's like, it was just neat. It was really neat.
Yeah.
But I loved it. So how do you like co-directing? Is that kind of more entertaining, or is it more difficult because you have to constantly work out together what your vision is for everything?
Yeah, it's it has its challenges for sure, and it has a lot of incredible benefits. So it's part of it is Joel and I have sort of very different personalities, and I would I once again going to refer to the Beatles. I think he's more like Paul McCartney and I'm more like George Harrison. Like, he's very kind of like upfront in his leadership, very dynamic, charismatic, very creative, very like puts the punch on everything, great showman. Whereas I'm more sort of the quiet, reflective, ponderous, and so just kind of finding a yin and yang in that. And then part of it was just, he's going to care about things more than I care about things, and vice versa. And so we would just encourage and let each other run on the things that each of us cared about the most. And so that ends up filling up things in a good way, I think, that balances. And then what was tremendously helpful is Andy Irwin, who's often co-directed with his brother on projects. He was an executive producer for us. So he would step in at times just to mentor us a bit on co-directing, and just said, one of the secrets to co-directing is you need to stay in close physical proximity, because that helps you be a unified front. It helps you immediately confer with each other on questions or decisions. And then also what we found is it helps prevent, when you're co-directing, the crew can kind of sometimes treat you like parents, where when you're a kid and you ask mom if a friend could spend the night, and mom says no, so you go ask dad. Like,
yeah,
I
exactly.
could sense at times there was a little bit of that, and you have to kind of nip that in the bud. So there was just a lot of kind of interesting dynamics with that. But overall, I'll say this: I'm capable of, and I have directed a film on my own, and having worked with Joel, I think he is as well. But I think on a project like this, we had 25 days. 4 of the main characters who are children, like they can only shoot so many hours a day because of, child labor laws.
Right.
So it's just a very harrowing, hectic, crazy schedule. So for this project in particular, I'm glad that there were co-directors. So we were able to kind of share that load
Well,
together.
and it's sort of nice too, because it's his family story. So it's,
Right,
you're not like abusing someone's story. He's right there with his voice
right,
in it. But
right,
there's also someone from outside going, no, that
right.
part's not really as interesting as you think. Like, let's
Yeah.
keep moving.
And to commend him as well, part of this I think is because he was a kid at the time, and part of it because he's just a really good instinctive innate showman. He was remarkably objective about his family story. I never butted heads with him on, well, you can't do it that way because this happened. He never, he honored the truth of the story without becoming a slave to the very specific facts of the story, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, how would you describe it in terms of it's a Christian film in the sense that there's conversation, I would say, somewhat about
Mm.
God. There are miracles in the story. And I would say there's an evolution of the Father in the story and sort of his
Right.
views, his worldview. How do you describe it? How would you say, what is Christian about this film?
Basically, you just described it really well. I think we try to go, okay, faith was integral to their story and to who they are. And part of it, I think part of just it being Christian is, there's a lot of talk these days and in Hollywood about representation. And I can understand why people want that for the various communities or ethnicities or what have you that they belong to. Understand why it's important to see themselves or their stories kind of told back to them on screen. I think Christians are largely the same way. Like we want to see our positive depictions of ourselves, and to see what's appealing about our worldview. Like it's not and then we're also sensitive to how we're portrayed. A lot of times Christians in media are portrayed pretty abominably, if I may say so. They're either hypocrites or some kind of theocratic fascists or something like that. So that was part of it, and then part of it was just going, okay, there were miracles, in their story, as and how can we show that, but do it in a way that hopefully is artful. And I think one thing we did, kind of a rule that we gave ourselves was, they pray for things in the story, and those prayers are answered. But one of the things we wanted to do was just make sure that prayers that they pray are not answered in that scene, or maybe even in the very next scene. They tend to come scenes later. And I would say the more massive the prayer request or the need, the longer it takes for it to be fulfilled. It was basically a look at, what does providence look like in life? How does it actually tend to happen? And trying to sort of artfully capture that in a way that looks real, and that hopefully the characters, or at least the main top few characters, feel fleshed out and nuanced. And as much as we were capable of doing that, ultimately audiences will decide if we succeeded, but that was our goal. And I would say that the Christian faith in it is there and clear, but it's kind of organic to the story. And I would say it's subtle but clear, rather than vague or on the nose.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not heavy-handed, right? Like you're not watching
Right.
you're not watching it feeling like, oh, well, this is a Christian. It's just that they're Christian people and they're having an experience in a Christian context, and it's very
Right.
beautiful. It's very beautifully done. I really loved it. I'm
Well, thank you.
curious about, well, a couple of things. One, the way that I was reading it when I was watching it, I had the sense that for their father, this experience of moving to the U.S. and then going through all of this was just such a tremendous, like, spiritual growth experience. Is
Yes.
that real? Is that true to their
Yeah.
real life
So
story, or is that? Yeah.
yes, and so it's interesting because there's kind of two sides to that coin. One is when I would interview him, as I did all the family members for the story, he would say, I was pretty nominal in my faith. He would say, I was a lukewarm Christian, but because of the miracles we witnessed, some which were, you know, people in their community and their church saw a need and acted, and that was a miracle in its own way. But then there's there's other miracles where, you know, people can't orchestrate it. It's a kind of a classic case of like what Proverbs says of, in his heart a man plans his course, but the Lord directs his steps. You know, they had those kind of miracles as well. And so he came out of it very much on fire in his faith. And then he also would say, I was very prideful, I was very arrogant, and this was a very humbling experience. And so on the one hand, it's true to the arc, but at the same time, there were instances where we had to externalize his internal feelings, if that
Yeah.
makes sense. And so that was kind of an artistic challenge. But I think in the end, he was happy with where we landed, and he's been the whole family. I could not have asked. I can imagine it would be very daunting and frightening to have your life made into a movie. And they've been, I can't imagine being in a better situation where the real life characters have been incredibly supportive and willing to be kind of honest and go to honest places.
That's beautiful. That is rare, right? And it's a big family. It's a
Yeah.
lot of people for all
Right.
of them to be honest and forthcoming.
Yeah.
And, you know,
Yeah.
thank God. That's
Yeah.
beautiful. Well, and it all works together to create a really very beautiful film. And then, and so, you know, next week, Jonathan Jackson's going to be on the show. Jonathan
Yes, and-
Jackson's in the film. And it's so funny when he finally comes on screen, you're like, oh, that's so
Right.
fun. It's great.
And if I may say so, he is fantastic. I love his performance in it.
Yeah, no, he was great. He's great. And then, so for our listeners, if you don't know his name, you remember in like 2012, everyone who was Orthodox at that time in America, we all woke up the day after the daytime Emmys going, hey, there was an actor on the Emmys that just thanked the monks on Mount Athos. Who is that guy? What is that? What just happened? And because, you know, I mean, we don't have a lot of celebrities in the Orthodox
Right.
Church, right? Like, so we get
Right.
really excited about Jennifer Aniston and Tom Hanks, and then all of a sudden,
Right.
Jonathan Jackson, we're like, oh, the guy from General Hospital's Orthodox. That's amazing. But so, of course, he started in Nashville, and he's a singer, and he's just, you know, really phenomenal. He's written a book for Ancient Faith as well. He's wonderful. But so how did that happen? Do you specifically look for Christian actors for a Christian film, or how does all that work?
Not necessarily. I mean, we just try to cast it, you know, who's right for the role. And, you know, you do want some like-mindedness when you're casting. Just, you know, like just as an example, the actress who plays Helen, the mother, she's from Australia, and she had recently taken a break to raise 4 children. So there was a very short bridge from her own motherhood to playing the mother in the film. And so just things like that you do kind of look for. But the way that it happened I had met Jonathan at church. A mutual friend introduced us kind of on the basis of, oh, you have a shared interest, you should meet each other. And it was, you know, a very brief meeting between 2 introverts in the film business. But as we were developing this script, you know, I would see him around, and I would think, you know, I think he might make a really good Eddie DeGarmo, which is one of the roles in the film. And so as we were getting nearer, I was talking to Joel and a producer. I was like, hey, I don't know if you know who Jonathan Jackson is. He starred on the show Nashville. You know, we attend church together. I think he might be a good Eddie DeGarmo. And I was expecting them to at best be like, oh yeah, okay, sure, yeah, like just put his info in and we'll have a look, you know. But they were like, oh yeah, that sounds cool, yeah. And so then again, with Andy Irwin, when I mentioned it to him, another producer, he was like, oh, I know Jonathan. We've hung out before. I'll reach out to him, which I was so grateful for, because again, I'd only met him once, and I was afraid that if I approached him directly, it would just be like, hey, me and my friends are making a movie. Like, do you think you could come hang out with us? You know, so having someone else like intervene would make it seem more legit. And so, yeah, he reached out to him, And so then we like more officially connected, and he has he has a unique point of view on it all that I'll say for him to tell, because he tells kind of a funny side of it and his point of view on it. But yeah, we met, we gave him the script, and then he read it on a flight to Romania and texted back and was like, yeah, I'm in, let's do it. So he was on set for a few days, and like I said, did a fantastic job.
That's fantastic. That's excellent. And he did. He was really good. He was fantastic. And he didn't, it's always fun with a really good actor that you just feel like, oh, you don't even feel like Jonathan Jackson at all. You just, like, you're a whole other, it's neat.
He really disappears into the role. And then also on top of giving a fantastic performance, he was a delight to work with as well.
Excellent. Oh, that's good. That's very good. All right. So the film opens Friday night, April 26th, right? Yeah. So where? Like, is it just going to be nationwide in theaters?
Yeah,
Do people have
nationwide,
to hunt for it?
and it's in local theaters. So for Orthodox listeners, there's kind of a tension here, which is that on the one hand, opening weekend does often make or break. I mean, opening weekend makes or breaks movies. Like, executives, they look at how opening weekend does, and that sets the tone for the film's success or failure moving forward. That said, our Holy Week begins basically Friday. And so if you can find time in a way that does not shortchange your sacramental liturgical life, I would appreciate you going to see the theater, maybe going to see the film, maybe a Friday afternoon or Saturday afternoon if you can't. I'd rather you see it later than never. So please, be mindful of your spiritual growth and all those things. But if you
have
can
to wait until Bright Week, okay.
right. If you can find a way to get away in good conscience and without shortchanging your liturgical life, that would be wonderful.
Well, Saturday evening, right? It's Lazarus Saturday. You're before Palm Sunday. There's no bridegroom service yet. You're not in Lent. Yeah. You're not in Holy Week. Right. You're in the limbo period, right? Like maybe it's a good, good time for a very beautiful and wholesome film, right? It's not. Yes. It's not like we're suggesting they watch something crazy.
Right.
But so out of curiosity, how does that work? So if you have better turnout that first Friday and Saturday, does that mean that you'll be like in more theaters for there will be more showings and it'll be more available?
It could work different ways, but what I've seen happen in the past with successful films is if it's big on opening weekend, the distributor will go, oh, this movie is catching fire. It works. Let's advertise it more. Let's put it in more theaters. And I hope I'm not taking this blasphemously out of context. But Jesus says, like, whoever has more will be given to them, and whoever doesn't have that will be taken away. It's like the movie business opening weekend. If you do well, the success compounds and grows. And then if you fail, that compounds and grows and has down the line ramifications. It's really wild. But yes, it is. And it's interesting because Joel and Luke, they've been saying that in the music business, if you come out with an album, you have a couple years to prove that album worked. You can trickle out singles, you can do remixes of one of the songs with a guest artist. You got 2 years to make that thing work. But like on film, you have 72 hours to prove that you did it. So,
and it's tough, right? I mean, it's hard to have a sleeper hit. Like, it's really, because if it's not doing well at first, they're not going to show it very often. It's going to be hard to find. Nobody's going to advertise it.
Right.
But then, and it also depends what else is happening that weekend, right? Like, what if, I don't know, what if a pandemic hits? What if there's an earthquake or something? It makes a big difference. It's crazy.
Yeah. And there were it's a story about miracles, and there were miracles that I feel like happened behind the camera and since. And one of those kind of mini miracles is that the release date is actually David and Helen's 49th wedding anniversary, which we had nothing to do with. That was Lionsgate picking that date based on what other releases were coming out, and it being 2 weeks before Mother's Day. So kind of remarkable.
Oh, that's so neat. That's really neat. Well, let's hope that bodes well, right? Like, hopefully.
Please, yes.
Hopefully. So what is on tap for you next? Like, what are you looking at doing?
So we So I've just signed on to write a sci-fi project, which
Ooh.
excites me. I'm really intrigued by. That's about all I can say at this point. But I'm intrigued about that, and kind of mixing, you know, sort of Christian worldview with science fiction should be an interesting but exciting challenge. And then the film that we had pivoted away from during COVID to do,
The Civil War.
if this film's a success, we could go back to that one.
Okay, cool. So when did you guys actually finish filming and editing this film? Like, how old is this to you? Like, when you're promoting it, are you promoting something
new?
Okay.
And this may seem odd that this is relatively new, but we shot it in October and November of 2022.
Oh,
So
okay,
about
that is
18
quick.
months ago.
Yeah.
And then we did, after that, you go into editing and sound mixing and visual effects and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And so and now we're well into the marketing phase, obviously. So it's been a start to finish from the time I heard the idea to now. It's been about a 3.5-year journey, and then from very heavy prep to it releasing, it's been about an 18-month.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. That's cool.
Journey.
It's always kind of a funny thing about, I think, movies and books, and that, like by the time they're coming out, you're like, well, somebody asks you about a detail, you're like, I don't remember, that was a while ago.
Right. Yeah. Some things are already sort of starting to fade and get obscure in my memory about some of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure. But that's also good. Maybe it glosses over the bad parts, and all you have is good memories now. It's like labor with a baby.
Yeah, exactly. And my wife has allowed me to make the analogy of making films to giving birth.
Yeah.
Like, no, I get it. I see the similarities. So
absolutely. Well, that's exciting. I'm really excited about the film. It really, truly, it's beautiful. Like, it turned out, I would be nice about it even if it weren't, but really I liked it. I liked it a lot.
Thank you.
But, so I do hope that any of our listeners who are able, maybe Lazarus Saturday after liturgy, maybe that's what your family needs, is a nice outing. It's a neat movie. It's really very beautiful. And then, I kind of want to hear about the sci-fi. I'm looking forward to that too. So when that comes out, you're going to have to come back and tell us about it, because that sounds pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Well, thank you, Richard. Thank you so much for coming on the program tonight. This has been a
Absolutely.
blast.
It's my pleasure.
So you can't even tell that you're introverted. You're just sitting here chatting it up. It was fantastic.
Yeah. Well, if you get me going about something I know or care about, I can go. But it's the small talk that I struggle with a little more.
I will not ask about the weather, I promise. Thanks very much, Richard. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And thank you to our listeners for joining us tonight. And, come back next Sunday night and we will meet. Oh, actually, next Sunday night, we'll meet Jonathan Jackson, and come back every Sunday night to meet another everyday Orthodox Christian. Have a good evening.